Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ohio edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. First, everyone's been muted. No need for you to worry about background noise on your end. We will, as you see in the agenda, be making time at the end for questions and comments. So let me explain to you how you can do that. At the top right of your screen, you see a control panel and a little orange tab with an arrow. If you click on that arrow, that shrinks the control panel. If you click on it again, it expands it back out. In the control panel, you see a questions section. On the far right-hand side, you see a little box with an arrow. If you click on that box, that pops the whole questions section out, and you'll see that you can write in a question and a comment. And again, we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Right below that, you see a handouts section. If you click on that, that will take you to a copy of the full report and a copy of the Ohio two-page summary that we will talk about in a minute. We are also recording this webinar, and we will send everybody who is registered a copy of the recording. Please feel free to share that far and wide with people you think might be interested. And so with that, let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Coffin. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network. This is an information and peer learning network that we created a couple of years ago in response to our last Farms Under Threat report, where we realized we needed to help build the collective capacity around the country of practitioners and community advocates who are looking to try and save the agricultural land base. We talk about permanent protection, we talk about planning and zoning, we talk about all the tools in the toolbox or tool shed to work on retaining agricultural land. So please consider joining us. I also wear a policy hat with American Farmland Trust. I work on farmland protection policy, land access, farm transfer, and farm viability issues. I am very pleased to be joined today by Max Webster, who is AFT's Midwest Policy Manager. Thank you, Max. Max is currently based out of Chicago, but he is a proud Ohioan and spent much of his childhood on his grandparents' tobacco farm in Claremont County. He's a graduate of the University of Cincinnati and previously worked with the Civic Garden Center of the supporting community gardens and urban agriculture projects in Cincinnati, as well as at Wilmington College, supporting their Grow Food, Grow Hope initiative. So, Max, thank you for joining us. And in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Max to introduce our guest. But let me just take a minute to talk about American Farmland Trust for those of you who don't know us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are actually the only national agricultural land trust, and we do protect land with landowners and farmers and ranchers. Some know us best by our bumper sticker, No Farms, No Food. The bumper sticker we had before this one said, "It's not farmland without farmers." And I liked that bumper sticker because it recognized that we understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives, our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but on promoting sound farming practices and helping with the viability and profitability for the farmers and ranchers who steward the land, both those who are on the land now and thinking about those who aspire to be on it in the future. Our programs and our research inform our federal and state policy advocacy, and we like to say we work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress. We have 6 regional offices, including a Midwest office and a national office in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Max.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction, and thank all of you for being here today. Really excited to share some of our findings from Farms Under Threat for 2040 and Ohio. This is a project that involves lots of partnerships And we're really grateful and want to start out by thanking and recognizing the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation partnership and financial support for our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status and threats to America's agricultural land base. And NRCS has been an invaluable partner during this research over the lifetime of that project, as well as our research partners with conservation science partners and partners on this important medicine. So now I'd like to introduce our special guest, Sarah Huffman, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Farmland Preservation at the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Sarah oversees the state's effort to partner with landowners, local governments, soil and water conservation districts, and land trusts to permanently preserve Ohio's farms and agricultural production, strengthening Ohio's #1 industry, food and agriculture. Prior to this appointment, she served as Associate General Counsel for the Bureau of Workers' Compensation from 2014 to 2019, and also as a staff attorney for the Franklin County Common Pleas Court. Sarah grew up on her family's farm in southeast Iowa, the oldest portion of which has been in the family since the 1840s. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today. I know you can only be with us for a few minutes. Our data shows that Ohio may lose over 518,000 acres of farmland to development in the next 20 years. We know this is a concern for the Department of Agriculture and would welcome your perspectives on how the department is responding to this and working to protect additional farmland around the state.
All right. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for being here this afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity to offer some comments about our goals, but also where we've been in the past few years and where we hope to be in the future. As you all know, this administration is committed to preserving farmland and is proud to partner with numerous entities, including AFT, local governments, local sponsors, and landowners. 2.5 years ago, we conducted an in-depth analysis of the internal processes of our office to improve efficiency, eliminate a backlog, and move projects along more quickly to closing. That was a huge barrier in the past to preserving farmland. But as a result, we've hit several significant benchmarks, including closing our 500th easement and preserving over 100,000 acres. Those numbers continue to increase as interest and demand for Ohio's farmland preservation program remains high, and we are rapidly approaching our 700th easement. 2 years ago, we brought our stakeholders together in work groups to identify ways to improve the farmland preservation program. Their input was valuable, and the main takeaway was that education and outreach is key in preserving more farmland in a strategic way that is consistent with the long-term plans and needs of local government. With streamlining our workflow, we are now able to devote more time to developing relationships with other entities that are involved in land use planning. AFT's release of its most recent Farms Under Threat report couldn't be more timely as we renew our efforts to reconnect with older members of our program and educate new interested members about their options for preservation. We also realize our Clean Ohio funds are limited and Ohio's landowners may be receiving other offers for their farms. That is why true, meaningful relationships with our partners are more critical now than ever. We all know the loss of agricultural land is an issue for Ohio and beyond. Preserving our farmland can be approached from many different angles. Perpetual easements are one tool, but there are other ways like agricultural district enrollment and the establishment of agricultural security areas. The common thread in all of these preservation concepts is that they start with conversations at the local level. It is our hope that more robust conversations going forward at the local level will not only advance these other preservation tools, but help identify additional opportunities. Thank you for having me here today. ODA values our relationship with all of you and appreciates all you do to help preserve our farmland.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate you being with us. We know you have to run. We're grateful that you joined us. Thank you again for being with us. And now Max and I are going to turn off our cameras. We're saying goodbye to Sarah. We're turning off our cameras, and we are going to jump into the methodology and the findings from the report. So the first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020. Mapped past conversion of agricultural land, looking first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land to 2040. We started with that 2001 to 2016 data from the State of the States report. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types: urban and high density development and low density residential development. So let's talk about those two for a minute. Urban and high density development is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. I'm waiting for the slides to catch up. Next slide. Next slide. It's been mapped and tracked for many years. This includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also includes rural industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Basically anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit in farmland conversion. And AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. So low density residential development typically ranges from lower density subdivisions to larger farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can still be found on low density residential development. And some of these smaller farm parcels, especially those in and around urban areas, can be quite profitable and sustainable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential development, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and high-density development. So, starting with this historical data, we projected into the future with the business-as-usual scenario. We made a straight-line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we had documented from 2001 to 2016. And with this, we predicted the level and the location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had our projections of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios, looking in two different types, both what is the land type that is going to be converted, so cropland or pasture land or woodland, as well as on the quality of the land that will be converted. And we did that based on our productivity, versatility, and resiliency index that we created in the 2020 process. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local, and there's no national database to turn to. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those historical conversion patterns. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity. This is a complex issue and was beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see in the website when we get there that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. Here, this first one, the business as usual, again, that straight line projection using that 2001 to 26 data. The second one is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl might actually be worse, and we know this is entirely possible given high housing costs in urban areas and the need for folks to continue to move out, plus the opportunity for more remote work, which is only likely to expand as rural broadband improves. Some parts of the country may already be on this runaway sprawl trajectory. Lastly, we modeled the future we hoped for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive ag land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some farm and ranch land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant agricultural land to meet the needs of the future. So a quick look at the assumptions that went into the three scenarios. You see here business as usual. Again, that's that straight projection based on past patterns, adjusted for future population growth only on the urban and high density side. And this because there's a strong correlation between population growth and urban and high density development. For runaway sprawl, we left that rate of urban conversion the same as the historical rate, but we assumed that in fact that low density residential land use would be more extensive, 50% higher, as you see here. And conversely, with the better built cities scenario, we projected a 25% lower rate of conversion for urban and high density land. Again, because we know that that is possible, that cities and towns can be more compact. And then we did what we thought was an ambitious but achievable 50% reduction in that conversion rate for low density residential land use. So moving on, this chart here shows each scenario's potential impact. You see on the left, the gray, that is the actual conversion that happened nationally in just the first 15 years of this century. That's 11 million acres. You can see, looking at business as usual or worse, runaway sprawl, we could see 18.4 to 24.4 million acres converted out of agriculture. That's about over 2,000 acres a day. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, we could shrink that footprint on productive ag land to more like 11 million acres. And some folks might be saying 11 million acres, is that really the best case scenario? We appreciate that some development is needed, especially renewable energy development, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we certainly hope they can be, we chose what we believe to be a realistic scenario. These next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Ohio compares to other states. This slide shows the projected total acres converted by county, and you can see that the darker colors that are scattered around the state show that there are quite a number of counties in Ohio that are fairly significantly impacted or likely impacted by development. This next slide shows the percent of agricultural land in each county that is projected to be developed. And again, it's a slightly different pattern, and the counties show up a little differently. Again, this is likely to be the case where there's a smaller amount of ag land to begin with and a significant amount of conversion. And we'll get more into the location of some of this conversion when we get to the website. So this next slide is a chart of the top 12 most impacted states in the country. And this is obviously not a top 12 list you really want to see your state on. Yet there is Ohio, which ranks 11th among states in projected agricultural land loss, with over 518,000 acres at risk of conversion. To put that number in perspective, it's roughly equivalent to all the farm acreage in Mercer and Wayne counties. Another key finding relates to impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that worked at the looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land. It's what we called PVR values. Land over a certain PVR threshold is land we consider to be nationally significant land. That's land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. You see all this nationally significant land in Ohio. It's just under 11 million acres, which is 95% of all the cropland acres in the state. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all agricultural land, likely because for the reason it's productive agricultural land, it's relatively flat, it's well drained, it's free of rocks, makes it very easily developed land. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this kind of land, even though it represents only 38% of the country's agricultural land base. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to all fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So here's another top 12 list you don't want to see your state on. Projected conversion of Ohio's most productive farmland is over 378,000 acres. While that's a relatively small percent of all the nationally significant land in the state, its conversion, as I mentioned, puts more production pressure on more marginal land, which has implications for both ag viability and the environment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Max to talk about the next two slides.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. One of the threats that we're highlighting in this report is the threat of solar and what it poses to agricultural land. To be clear, American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in many mutually beneficial ways. This map shows the projected areas of utility-scale solar photovoltaic energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's solar future study. The study estimates that there will be 7.4 of facilities by 2040 to meet the Biden administration's energy goals. This map shows the percentage of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same Department of Energy solar future study. We did model the conversion of land to solar development, but did not include that data layer in this report because of questions around the data. There's some information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that's available through the Farmland Information Center. We'll also be providing or releasing a solar white paper this year. The most important findings were that 83% of projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. Now we're going to dive into the data available for Ohio on the interactive web map. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Frazier, who will be helping us navigate across the map.
Great. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Beth, for helping us out here. When you start, so we're now in the website, and Beth at some point is going to put a link to the website in the chat so that people are welcome to, all of you are welcome to look at it when you have time. When you get there, this is what you will see. This is the cover page. Basically, it's some summary information about the scenarios and some of the findings. To get out of that, you simply click on the arrow, on the X up there on the right-hand side. And while we're looking and talking about the right-hand side, let's look up in the upper right-hand corner to look at these other tabs. That About tab brings that summary document right back. Next to it, you'll see a how-to tab. That takes you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. The View Report tab takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where Beth is taking us right now. And in here, you see that you can find the report, the executive summary, again, how to get into the map, the solar technical reports that Max just mentioned, other technical information, and some of the past reports, including the State of the State report that we mentioned earlier. We are making the geospatial data layers as well as additional data available to the public. So if you would like that request data tab that Beth has just taken us to is the place to make that request. And again, it can be for some of the GIS layers, or it can simply be for more information about counties. And that is one of the big things that we do want to talk up in this report, is that there's a lot of county level information that we hope people will think useful. So with that, we are now going to zoom into Ohio and click on Ohio. And when Beth does that, you see that what comes up on the left-hand side is the Ohio statewide data and those 3 different scenarios. And on the right-hand side, what came up is Marion County, which just happened to be where Beth's cursor was when she clicked on Ohio. So let's take a minute to talk about these. The difference here, you see the 3 scenarios, and the darker red, or the very rust color, is that urban and high density development. And the brighter orange is the low density residential development projection, so that you see the runaway sprawl scenario projects 696,000 acres of land could be lost to development statewide. What's interesting here is that you see for the state as a whole, and it's true for Marion County, that most of the projected development is likely to be that low density residential conversion, and we'll talk more about that. So going down, let's look a little bit more about what kind of information that we can see here. You see that it talks about 53% of Ohio's conversion is going to be on that best high quality farmland. Again, right here, you see that business as usual, 272,000 plus acres could be of that higher value, higher productivity land could be converted. And you see there on the right, the numbers for Marion County. When you look down further, you see how that shakes out by land type, so that 351,000 of that 518,000 is likely to be cropland conversion based on our projections and past practices. You see 95,700 acres of likely conversion of pasture land. And then you see a woodland number of 71,000. And just a note about that, that's obviously not all the woodland in Ohio that's likely to be converted. But in 2020, we came up with a way of modeling and estimating woodland associated with farms and ranches. And so in this case, that woodland number reflects the numbers of acres that is woodland associated with a farm that is likely to be converted, probably in connection with some of that cropland or pasture loss. And then down below, the last thing we want to point out is that low density residential development paves the way for future development. Again, it tends to be an interim land use that continues on to get more higher density development. And for Ohio, our projections show that land that is in low density residential areas in 2016 is 10 times more likely to end up in urban and high density development by 2040. So let's take a quick look at this a downloadable 2-page summary where Beth is showing on this blue tab right here. We hope that folks will find good use for this. It's easily printed, it's easily downloaded, it's easily shared with people with members, with policymakers, with county officials. Again, we hope folks will share this with everyone they think should have an interest in this data. Again, you see the 518,000. What you see here, the other thing that we did was to look at what that might mean for the industry as a whole in the state. And using the 2017 Census of Agriculture, that 518,000 acres translates into roughly 4,000 farms that would be likely to go out of business, $274 million in farm output, and the potential loss of 8,100 jobs associated with the agricultural sector. And here again, you see, actually, this is a different number now that I notice, that 73% of the conversion is likely to be on Ohio's nationally significant land. The last thing to point out here is that we talk about the 3 counties here that are some of the hardest hit, most likely to have the most conversion, so Warren, Licking, Delaware counties. And in just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Max and Beth, who are going to take us in to some of these and some other counties. This is the rest of the 2-pager. Again, we hope that folks will find this useful and a useful thing to share with many other people who might be interested. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Max, and he and Beth are going to dive in further to look at the maps.
Great, thanks, Chris. And we're going to start off here by taking a look at some of those impacted counties that were identified on that 2-page handout that we were just looking at. So Beth, if you want to go over to Warren County. Great, and we can zoom in there. And if you can, Beth, before we get going as well, could you point out the legend in the right-hand corner so that folks can reference that and know where to find it and see what some of the colors are associated that we're looking at. We're currently in the 2016 land cover view, and the legend for each of these colors in the data set can be selected on the screen. You can also change the base map by going to the top right corner, and you can select the view giving the landscape with scenarios stacked on top of each other. With the slider up in the right-hand corner, you can adjust the transparency of the data layer by simply sliding back and forth. And lastly, you can select the standard view. This view offers more contrast for the data, so we encourage you to play around with that and really dive in and see how you can put this to best use. So let's go ahead and select a scenario. We can put in our business as usual case study here on the left side. So looking at if we're following our current development pressures, how that looks for Warren County, and on the right side we can compare that to how that looks for the runaway sprawl example. So if you can see, and as Beth's sort of showing the transparency there and looking at the land cover, and we zoom in, you can see that the impacted area that we're looking at here is pretty substantial, and especially looking at that low density development and how that looks for Warren County. So we know that this is an area that's in the Cincinnati suburbs, and so that's what we would expect, but it's a pretty significant area. And so folks who come to this area to recreate, maybe you're on Little Miami Bike Trail, you have some places that you like to go here, you can see and imagine what those impacts might be under these 2 different scenarios. And so that provides a pretty good insight into why it's important for us to think about planning and other tools in these areas to protect this farmland, because, and as Chris mentioned previously, when we're looking at these different layers and looking at our farms, and Beth, I don't know if we want to zoom real far in and look at some satellite imagery here and maybe look at that in some close detail. because we know that in the Midwest and in Ohio, our agricultural lands are not just croplands. They're composed of lots of different things that are happening on the landscape. So you can see underneath those potentially impacted areas, there's forest cover, there's natural areas, there's all of the components of the rural landscape that we know and appreciate. And so those are all the things that we're trying to protect when we think about farmland in Ohio. So next, we're going to jump up to Delaware County, just north of Columbus, and take a look there. So folks might know this area as well. And Delaware County and Licking County, just there to the east, are the other two counties that are expected to be impacted the largest by development. And we know that these are also areas that really stand out because of proposed development that we know is already underway. Folks might be familiar with the Intel plant that's coming in Licking County, just to the east of Columbus, and we know that that's going to spur a lot of development associated with that. So thinking about how to get ahead of that and think comprehensively about our planning in a way that we can protect the agricultural economy in these counties, I think is really important. And it's also important for watershed work and protecting water quality, something that we'll talk about a little bit further on in the presentation. And then lastly, Beth will jump up to Medina County, just outside of Cleveland, so that we can take a look at some of those impacts. So just one more south there. Yep, there we go. So looking out in the southern Cleveland suburbs, out towards the Akron area, and just bordering up against Cuyahoga Valley National Park, we can see what some of those potential impacts look like in this area as well. So thinking about the agriculture that does exist in this area, as well as that connection to the role that the natural areas on agricultural lands play in connection to larger areas on the landscape, we can start to visualize what those impacts might look like. So I think that's it, and I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Max. And thank you, Beth, for your expert cruising. We're going to go out of the website now. And now that we've talked about the findings and looked at the map, we want to take a minute to talk about action. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official or a state legislator or a state agency employee or a congressional staffer, we hope you'll find a recommendation in here that you might like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. If you were a farmer, a landowner, a community advocate, you work for a conservation or a farm or a smart growth organization, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So I want to take a minute just to highlight a few of the things that we talk about in the report in each of these 4 categories. So in the encourage smart growth, foundational to smart growth and compact development is good local planning. Comprehensive plans can provide the vision and road map for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to have comprehensive plans, and we urge people to get involved in their local or county comp plan development and review. We also encourage states to support local comprehensive planning and to have a statewide plan for agricultural land retention and protection. Relatedly, protecting agricultural land, Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements or development rights from willing farmers and landowners. More funding for that program would help protect more farmland in Ohio. Advance smart solar siting. State and local governments can incentivize solar development on existing infrastructure and marginal land, as well as incentivize agrivoltaics or dual-use solar development. If solar is located on productive agricultural land, local governments should ensure that solar development adheres to best practices, not just in the decommissioning, but in the construction of it and the operation of those solar developments to preserve soil health, water resources, and the ability for farmers to farm the land during and after the life of the project. And lastly, support farmland access. State and local governments can develop their own or help to fund extension or nonprofit farm link programs, such as Heartland Farm Link here in Ohio. With the seismic generation transfer of land and agricultural assets underway, there is a huge need to help older farmers and landowners who are looking for a successor or for someone to lease their land. There's also a big need to assist farm seekers in identifying and assessing land opportunities. This technical assistance can be time sensitive and expensive, but extremely valuable in keeping farmland in farming. And now Max is going to talk a little bit more about planning for agriculture and what AFT is doing to address agricultural land conversion in Ohio. And right before Max, I turn it back over to you. Let me remind everybody that we are taking questions, or feel free to leave a comment. Again, you get there in the questions tab on the control panel, clicking on that little box on the very far right-hand side. So please, if you do have questions, please write them in there now. So Max, to you.
Thanks, Chris. Just going back to our earlier guest with Sarah Huffman and revisiting the Farmland Preservation Office with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, that's a program that we've been really glad to support for a number of years and will continue to support in looking at ways of getting permanent farmland protection on the landscape. But at a local level, community planning is super important and crucial when it comes to smart growth. As part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. And this involves the 4 basic principles that you're seeing on the screen right now that can work in tandem with efforts for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our Farmland Information Center website. So if you're looking for ideas, please visit the Farmland Information Center. Ohio is a state that really relies on local governments and communities to take initiative and identify their primary priorities for planning. Getting more smart growth and farmland protection underway really starts at the local level. And that's where all of you come in, and why it's really important to reach out to your local officials and ask about things like how are conservation development codes fitting into the planning process? Is there any zone agricultural protection in my area or that's under development? And how can we think about things like purchase of development rights fitting on the landscape in the right way? One other thing that's really important for Ohio that I don't need to remind you all of, but something that we've been working on a lot with AFT is the importance of taking a watershed-based approach, thinking about how farmland protection can fit within that context of watershed planning. And protecting not only our farmland, but also our water resources. So we've been working in Ohio for years to promote the adoption of environmentally sound farming practices, particularly in the upper Scioto River, to protect downstream drinking water through our Agricultural Conservation Innovations Initiative. And it's exciting to think about how we can take projects like that and layer on top farmland protection so that not only are we protecting farmland long into the future, but we're also getting farmers enrolled in those practices on those acres that are going to protect our drinking water and other resources that we rely on. I think we need to be thinking about how we can do more of use some of the resources that we've identified, the tools that we've identified through this process of Farms Under Threat make those connections and implement some really cool projects around the Buckeye State. I'm going to pass it back over to Chris to bring us over to our question and answer and wrap us up.
Great, thank you, Max. And I think, Max, why don't you and I turn our cameras back on? Back on, there we go. I think it's clear that it is a Friday afternoon because people are very quiet and I'm not seeing any questions. So let me talk about, if we can go to the next slide and just go to a couple of resources that we have available. And actually, you know, now I'm sorry that I did that. So Beth, if you can go back to the prior slide. I do want to talk about just one thing, and this is something that there's a lot more information on our website. If you look down here on the far right-hand side, this COCS, or the Cost of Community Services Studies, and what they're now, when we talk about the Farmland Information Center, you can find on that center's website a whole lot more information about these cost of community services studies. And it's just a reminder that low density residential development is often seen as the way as expanding the tax base for communities, when in fact it always requires more in public services than it brings in property tax revenues. And conversely, keeping land in agricultural production, even if it's in some kind of agricultural use assessment or current use taxation, even then it requires far less in services than it contributes to the local property tax base. So it's just an important reminder of some of the economic arguments for retaining the agricultural land base. And so with that, now we'll go back to the last slide, and let me just mention again the National Agricultural Land Network. I know I talked about it at the beginning. I just want to remind people that it is free. It is intended for folks who are doing this work professionally, but if it's open to anybody who has a strong interest in learning more from other people doing this work around the country. So we encourage folks to join. The Farmland Information Center is a wealth of information that ranges from information for landowners, particularly landowners who might want to understand about what are agricultural conservation easements, or who might want to understand more about what are the options around conservation practices, soil health, how does one find financial assistance for support of some of those practices. It has also got a lot of information about policy, both and about comprehensive plans and some examples of good local comp plans and farmland protection plans. There's also a call-in number, which you see there, and folks do answer the phone, and they are happy to point you to the resources or to help you come up with information that you need. So we really do encourage people to use both of these resources. And the last resource obviously available to folks is the Midwest office. And Max is one of several folks in the office. And we do have a number of people working in Ohio on several things. So Max, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out for the afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon. We know that there's big challenges when it comes to threats to farmland in Ohio, but we know that there are committed partners across the state that are out there ready to do the work to help move forward the policy solutions that we've identified in this report. So we're on standby to help out with that. So please do reach out if you do have any questions or support that you're looking for. And if you have any questions about the Farms Under Threat 2040 report, please reach out as well and make use of tools like the the web map to look at your area and ask questions about how you can do more for farmland protection. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great weekend.
Great. Thank you all.